Welcome back. Hope you've had time to digest the last lecture and do a little bit of thinking about some of the things you've read and some of the things we talked about. We're ready now to continue looking at Chapter 1. Chapter 1, The Nature of Morality, Part 2. We're going to talk briefly, and you may be wondering whether I can talk about anything briefly, but really I can on occasion. We're going to talk very briefly here about the origin of morality. Where did it come from? Now, the authors of our texts spent considerable time making it clear that they do not believe it came from any supernatural source. They're going to be proposing their own theory. It's going to be a subjective rather than an objective theory of morality. And obviously, if we're going to accept the new theory, then the old theory has to be shown to be insufficient or somehow deficient. And that's what they attempted to do in really pretty much an overt attack on religious morality. That's going to continue for a while in the textbook. If you are a religious person, you may be offended by that. Bear with it. You're in college now, and it's time to be exposed to contrary ideas and learn about them. And you do have a professor here that's kind of into the philosophy of religions, so perhaps there will be a balance between what the authors say in the textbook and what I will be saying in these lectures. The author has concluded that values are both objective and subjective. Objective only in one sense, that the natural world has value because there are conscious beings who value this world, and they would value it whether or not we were here with them or not. But he has been arguing throughout the textbook, or the textbook so far, that moral values are subjective, that they are not something that have been revealed to us from some sort of divine source. So, given this, the author suggests it is possible to construct the following theory concerning the origin of morality. They state that morality comes from the complex interaction between conscious human beings and material, mental, or emotional things in specific contexts. Now, they said that the natural world has value because there are conscious beings who value the world, and so it would be a thing of value even if we were not here to enjoy it. Now he adds conscious human beings because, as he has stated, at the present time only human beings are morally responsible. So how is it that morality came into being? Well, he would say that as human beings interrelated to one another in a social context, rules became necessary. You have one person, you don't need many rules. Morality is not an issue. You have two, well, there's possibly going to be some conflict, and you're going to have some rules to live together. And as more and more conscious human beings came into being, and as they interacted with one another, as they interacted with the material world, as they had various thoughts and had emotions about various things in specific context, morality, like human life itself, evolved. In other words, morality stems from our needs, our desires, and it's based on our emotions, but also our reason. Something happens in the ancient past. Let's say the first human being is murdered by another human being. Everyone is feeling highly emotional about this, and they say, this is wrong. This should not be. There should be a law against this. The tribe is no longer going to put up with this. And so their emotional response to a specific event led to a desire for a rule, a law. And once you have that, then of course it's very reasonable, because if you go around killing each other, how are we going to be able to live together meaningfully and ethically? And so morality came into being. In other words, morality is a social construct. It's an important philosophical term, social construct. Social construct means society created or constructed morality, and society determined what would be valuable and what would not be valuable. So the old traditional theory said that morality came from a transcendent source. Transcendent means above, beyond us. It came from a supernatural source. Morality was built into the universe itself. Morality is built into our consciousness by a creator. Morality has been revealed to us by our creator. No, the author said, that is not true. Morality is a human invention. There are, according to the authors of our textbook, and I think we could agree with this, certain kinds of morality that we are exposed to as we move through life. The first time we become acquainted with morality is in the nursery. From our parents, the morality we're introduced to is customary morality or traditional morality, a morality that's based on custom or tradition. And again, a little side note here, when philosophers speak of tradition, that's kind of a synonym for religion, religious tradition, the tradition of the tribe. This is traditional morality, customary morality. What is it based on? Custom. This is the first morality we encounter as we are enculturated. We are introduced to it in our home, in our religious worship. So we go to church, synagogue, mosque, temple. It is reinforced by the culture. This is our custom. This is the way we do things here. Welcome to the world, little baby. Now you're going to learn how to behave yourself in our particular society according to our customs and our traditions. Customary morality is presented to the members of a culture and often accepted without analysis or critical evaluation throughout childhood and our adult years. Some people never get beyond this. This is what they were taught. This is what they do. They don't think about it. They don't evaluate it. Of course, this is right. This is what we do in our culture, and it has to be right. Now, I would question whether it's never evaluated. I have a 3-year-old granddaughter, and she seems to be evaluating the rules quite a bit these days, and she has some questions as to why she should have to do something or not do something. But more or less, this is true, and I think we can pretty much all agree with this. We have a traditional morality, a customary morality that we're introduced to as we make our entrance into this world, and we become quite adept at the ins and outs of this moral system by the time we reach our adult years. The author suggests, and I agree with him, that we need at some point in our lifetime to move past mere customary morality and become involved in what they refer to here as reflective morality. They define reflective morality as the careful examination and the critical evaluation of all moral issues, whether or not they are based on religion, custom, or tradition. They're urging us to become Socrates here. Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And I don't know where you're at on that particular issue, but I agree with that. So far, so good. The authors then add a little something else that's maybe not such good advice. They write, all custom, tradition, systems of ethics, rules, and ethical theories should be carefully analyzed and critically evaluated. No problem. Had they put the period there, I would say, yeah, very good advice. But they don't. They continue and say this: we need to carefully evaluate and critically examine all of our morals, customs, and traditions before we continue to accept or live by them. That sounds a little bit dangerous to me. Perhaps it might be wiser to reflect as we go along and continue to live by the rules we have been taught until we have examined and evaluated them and decided that perhaps some of them should be discarded. Might be that as we critically evaluate and examine our morality, we'll decide, hey, these are some pretty good principles. The customs of my home, the traditions of my family, they're pretty good. But just saying we're going to live without rules until we have an opportunity to figure out what we're going to believe seems like a prescription for a disaster. Give you a kind of a silly example. You're driving down the street, you notice a stoplight ahead. You know, because you know the rules of our culture, that means you're supposed to stop. But you say, you know what, I haven't really had an opportunity to reflect upon that rule and evaluate it, so I'm just going to ignore it. Well, the next thing you know, you might be involved in a very bad traffic accident. So maybe it's best to continue to stop at stop signs until after you have evaluated and examined and decided whether or not you should continue to do so. It might just save your life, and it might save you from some sort of moral disaster. There's a danger in drifting into your moral choices, and reflection is a good idea. But the rules that were passed down to you, the customs you have received, came to exist for a reason. And before we decide that we don't need a fence, it might be a good idea to figure out why the fence was put there in the first place. The author returns to the subject of morality and religion. Once again, he's in my wheelhouse here. That's kind of my thing. And he acknowledges that throughout history, religion has served as a powerful institution for getting people to behave morally. And that's certainly true. Why should I do this? Why should I not steal? Well, thou shalt not steal. Haven't you ever read that? God doesn't want you to steal. Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to get in trouble with God, so I'm not going to steal, even though I'd really like to have that thing that my neighbor has there. But I'm not going to do it because my religion says it's wrong. So that is kind of self-obviously true. And the author acknowledges that this has been true throughout history. Religion has provided the motive for people to behave morally. So that's true. But, the author says, the fact that religion may have preceded formal legal and moral systems. What do you mean may have? Yeah, people were practicing religion before they got together and says we need some laws. As far back as you find the human animal, you find them worshiping something. Recent discoveries at Göbekli Tepe, the oldest city that's ever been discovered, shows that hunter-gatherers may have invented civilization for religious reasons. So religion's been there for a long time. Legal codes, moral systems, certainly the philosophy of ethics, that came much later. And the author says it may have provided a very, very powerful and effective sanctions for morality. Now he's, a little bit not sure. He says it has proved a powerful institution for getting people to behave morally, and now he says, well, maybe it has. What do you mean maybe it has? Of course it has. That has been the primary reason or motive behind moral behavior throughout all of human history until the moral age, when you had skepticism and people begin to move to more secular ideas. But throughout human history, why should I do it? Well, and if I'm Hindu, I don't want to come back as a cockroach or something. So I'm going to be a moral person, lest karma come around and bite me on the butt. And in the Judeo-Christian tradition, I don't want to go to hell, and so it goes. The author, though, is equivocating a bit here. He says, even though it's true, okay, religion's been there, it has provided the motivation for morality. But that doesn't prove that morality has to have a religious base. Well, if he's going to propose a non-religious system of morality, that would make sense, because that's an assumption that he has to have. Can you conclusively prove, Drs. Thoreau and Crossman, that morality doesn't need to have a religious base? Or is this something you assume to be true? We come back to that conclusive proof thing. And of course, the authors cannot prove that morality does not require a religious faith. As a matter of fact, a lot of people question whether morality can exist without a religious basis. Because historically speaking, a supernatural natural basis for morality has been the only thing that's provided the logical foundation and the motivation for people to consistently behave morally. So when the authors say, morality doesn't necessarily require a religious foundation, well, we don't know that because it hasn't really been tried that often, and when it has been tried, it hasn't worked that well. And so many great thinkers have raised the question as to whether it's possible to maintain morality over the long haul without the support of religion. Can religion sit on any base other than the religious base? Is that possible? Some say, well, yeah, it's possible, but I don't think it's going to be quite as easy as the authors of the textbook seem to think it will be. Let me introduce you to some of these great thinkers. This picture of Fyodor Dostoevsky, Russian novelist, thought a lot about these questions. One of his novels, The Brothers Karamazov, introduced us to a character by the name of Ivan Karamazov. He is the father of the brothers Karamazov, and he is an absolutely despicable human being who does absolutely terrible things, and he can get away with it because he's rich and powerful. And so you say, well, Ivan, you're terrible. How can you behave this way towards your fellow human beings? And the answer that Ivan gives is, if God doesn't exist, everything is permitted. Now, this may be the basis of the author's objection to objective morality when they said atheists can be moral. Ivan Karamazov would answer, well, sure they can, but that's not how I choose to live my life. Why should I be moral? That can be your choice if you choose to live that way. That's your choice. Great. Hope it works out well for you. But I don't want to live my life that way. I want to be a dastardly individual. I want to be a person driven by baser instincts. Why shouldn't I? Who says I should not live the way I'm living and that I should live as a moral atheist? Who are you to tell me what to do? This is what I refer to as the who says so problem. We'll be talking about that in this course. I'm going to ask you what it is on a test. You might want to be prepared for that. The who says so problem has to do with the fact that, okay, we used to say when we had traditional morality that you want to do the right thing because if you don't, karma's going to get you. Or, it may be bad for you because God's going to be unhappy. But now, if we no longer believe that, if we have a subjective-based moral theory that leaves God out of the moral equation, and someone says, you need to be good, we may respond like the bully in the playground. Oh, yeah? Who says so? And maybe you never encountered a bully in the playground. When I was a kid in the 1950s, they roamed the playgrounds. And you'd say, you stop it. And they'd say, oh, yeah? Who says so? Who's going to make me? And of course, the teachers were looking the other way. And so those of us who were bullied would cower before the larger, more powerful, demented oppressor. But it's a good question. And Dostoevsky's Ivan Karamazov asked it. I should be good? Who says so? What gives you the moral authority to tell me what to do? So, well, society says so. Oh, yeah? Well, what gives society the right to tell me, an individual, what to do? It's a good question. There is a problem when you leave religion out of the moral equation. These two individuals noted the problem as well. What you see here is a picture of Will and Ariel Durant. They were historians. They were both atheists. They weren't like the modern atheists that were out on an evangelistic crusade to tear down religion and to promote atheism. They just happened not to believe. They wrote a monumental history of the world, multi-volume set. Each volume about 3.5 inches thick. Altogether, they take up about 3 foot of shelf space in a library. They wrote about the history of the world from earliest times all the way up to their own time. They realized at some point in time we're going to have to quit this because history keeps moving, but we're not going to keep moving. And so they did finish their work. After they had finished, they wrote a much smaller little book called The Lessons of History. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick. And they finished their work while the Soviet Union was still around, and the Soviet Union was running an experiment with subjective morality, seeing if we can sustain morality over the long haul without the support of religion. And others were trying the same thing in the communist world, and many intellectuals were saying we should go the same way. People such as our authors who said subjectivity in morality is possible. Well, as they looked at history, the Durants had some doubts, and this is what they wrote, that states, what they mean as nation states, should attempt to dispense with theological supports is one of many crucial experiments that bewilder our brains and unsettle our ways today. There is no significant example in history before our time of a society successfully maintaining moral life without the aid of religion. Now, that's an interesting observation. They were atheists themselves, and they saw officially atheistic governments attempting to maintain moral life over the long haul without theological support. They said it's a crucial experiment, but it kind of blows our minds. It bewilders our brains. It unsettles our ways. Why? Why would that be unsettling to the Durants? Well, because they looked at history, says we can't find an example of this ever working. Show us the society that's been able to maintain moral life without the aid of religion. Well, of course, the Soviet experiment failed. We're in the middle of one of our own. Right now, we seem to be in a moral crisis. The culture is greatly divided along religious lines. The secularists, of course, would like to say we can do it. We can succeed where the Soviet experiment failed, where the French experiment failed before that during the French Revolution. We can get her done. Well, I don't know. It's never been done. Perhaps there's been some morality that's been maintained for a while, but it all seems to fall apart at some point in time. So when the authors say that morality does not necessarily require the support of religion, what do they base that on? Can that be conclusively demonstrated? It would seem that the evidence is not there to support the assumption. Oh, here's another voice, a philosopher, one of the great thinkers of the modern era, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche, like the Durants, was an atheist. He wasn't happy about it. It made him sad. He once told a believing friend who was flirting with atheism that if you can hold on to your faith, do it. The reason for the unhappiness is Nietzsche understood the implications of atheism perhaps better than his peers, perhaps better than some of our modern atheists, evangelistic atheists such as the late Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins. And he viewed the age of unbelief with some sadness. Now, he believed that eventually the human race would pull itself together and we would evolve to the place where we could fill the empty shoes of God. But having concluded that God was dead, Nietzsche wondered who would fill his shoes. And he kind of predicted some of the horror of the 20th century because he recognized that human beings have a lot of evolving to do before they're going to be able to maintain morality over the long haul without the support of religion. And some say, as he foresaw that troubled time of evolution, that he looked into the 20th century and went mad. I kind of agree with that. But that's another discussion for another philosophy class. But to explain the problem he foresaw in his book, The Gay Science, Nietzsche created a character called the madman. And the madman could be Nietzsche because a madman is speaking what Nietzsche saw to be the consequences, at least in the short term, of the death of God. Let's look at what he had to say. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I'm looking for God, I'm looking for God. But as many of those who did not believe in God were standing together there, he excited considerable laughter. Have you lost him then, said one. Did he lose his way like a child, said another, or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or immigrated? Thus they shouted and laughed. The madman sprang into their midst and pierced them with his glances. Where has God gone? He cried. I shall tell you, we have killed him, you and I. We are his murderers. But how have we done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained the earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns? Are we not perpetually falling backward, sideways, forward, in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is it not more and more night coming on all the time? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's decomposition? God's too decomposed. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, murderers of all murderers, console ourselves? That which was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet possessed has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? With what water could we purify ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we need to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods simply to be worthy of it? And there has never been a greater deed, and whosoever shall be born after us for the sake of this deed, he shall be part of a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent, and again regarded his listeners. And they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke and went out. I've come too early, he said. My time has not yet come. The tremendous event is still on its way, still traveling. It's not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds require time even after they are done before they can be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the distant stars, and yet they've done it to themselves. Nietzsche's point here, in case you missed it, is that God had some big shoes. He's dead. Now, Nietzsche isn't saying really that he died or we killed him. He didn't believe God ever existed, but certainly he existed in the minds of the men and women of the Western world, and he provided that moral equilibrium to Western civilization. Okay, in the modern age, we've gotten rid of God. He's dead. But what's going to take his place? This is the who says so problem. We used to say we should be good because God says so. Who says so now? Why should I be good? Who's going to do it? Now, Nietzsche was hopeful that an Uberman with the will to power could arise and give order and fill those big shoes. Certainly some human agency, some human person was going to have to do it. It's either have to be man or it's going to have to be society. But it's going to have to be a human being, and Nietzsche had real questions as to whether we were up to the question, or up to the challenge, I should say, not up to the question. Story of Nietzsche. He saw a horse being beaten nearly to death by its master, and Nietzsche threw himself on the horse to try to save its life, demanding that the beating stop. Well, this ended up getting him committed. He's obviously insane. I think it may have been the sanest moment of his life, because he saw in that man beating the horse who was going to have to fill the empty shoes of God. And I think he realized we have a whole bunch of evolving to do before we are going to be able to fill those shoes and maintain morality without the aid and support of religion. So our authors say that it can be done. I think Nietzsche, if he was here, would say, yeah, but... and I'm not so sure he would have been any more encouraged by what we were seeing in the 21st century than by what he was seeing at the end of the 19th century. If he looked into the 20th century and went mad, what would happen to the poor guy if he looked into the 21st century? Well, we shall see, won't we? Because the experiment is underway, and it will be interesting to see how it all turns out. The picture you see there is of the most important man you have never heard of. His name is Lawrence Kohlberg, late of the University of Chicago. I say he's one of the most important men you have never heard of. This man has impacted your life. He's impacted all of our life. He's impacted our civilization over the course of the last 50 to 60 years, and he's going to continue, I would suspect, to have an influence. He was a brilliant man, and he developed a theory of moral development which changed the discussion in the area of morals and ethics. What Kohlberg did is he came up with a theory of how we develop morally as human beings. And he saw three distinct levels of moral development. And within these three levels, there are sub-levels that people can or do pass. Kohlberg observed that we all start at the pre-conventional level. We start as children. And the first moral term we become acquainted with is the term no. And boy, do we hate that term. We discover that there are other wills in addition to our own in this strange new world we are living in. We want to do something, but we have these big people, mom and dad, who are saying no, and we find out there are restrictions. And there is punishment if we do not obey that authoritative voice. And there is reward, perhaps, if we do obey. So at this level, we're instrumental relativists, you know. It's all about the punishment and the reward. And that's about as deep as we get when it comes to moral reasoning. We move from there into the conventional level. The authors have mentioned the conventional level, conventional morality, that which we're introduced to as children, and which most of us will then continue to observe throughout the rest of our life. The principle here is interpersonal concordance. We want to get along with one another. Interpersonal, me and another person, concordance, concord, harmony. And our orientation here is very much law and order. We move from that to the post-conventional level. Well, not everyone does, actually. The point of Kohlberg's theory is that we should. And this would correspond with what the authors refer to as reflective morality. First level, we begin to think in terms of social contract, that we're a society and we're agreeing to live under these rules in exchange for certain things that are beneficial to us living as members of a society. Hopefully we move past that to the universal ethical principle orientation. We'll unpack all these a little more. The pre-conventional level, terms like good, bad, right, wrong, well, we're little children, and it's all about what's in it for me. Is it to my physical advantage to do this? My hedonistic advantage? Are there consequences that are painful if I don't do what I am told to do, which my parents are saying is good? And if I don't do that, I'm doing the bad thing, I'm doing the wrong thing. Is it to my advantage to do the right thing or the wrong thing? That's kind of as deep as we go when we're children. There are some stages, though. Our moral decisions at this point in time are made in response to authority, either accepting that authority or resisting it. But we move to the place where we begin to think about self-interest. We are born selfish little creatures when it gets right down to it, and we're asking ourselves, what's in it for me here? The conventional level, pack that a little bit. As we said, it's similar to what the authors referred to as customary or traditional, i.e. religious morality. The authors and Kohlberg believe this is unreflective, consists of maintaining and conforming to the expectation of others. Stage 3 of this level, and there are levels, we're living up to others' expectations. We want to be part of the group. We don't want to be outcasts. We don't want to be voted off of the island. And so we're trying to earn the approval of others. We want to be thought of as nice people. At stage 4, we have now become adults and we have kids of our own. We're in positions of authority within the culture, and our interest there is maintaining the way things are, the status quo. I was once told that the definition of the status quo is the current mess. And so maintaining the way things are becomes an end in and of itself. So you can see Kohlberg and the authors of our textbook do not think much of the conventional level. We need to have a graduation ceremony and move on to the post-conventional level. It's also called the autonomous or principled level. Now, if we reach this stage, and hopefully you will actually as a result of a course like this, you're going to think about morality. One of the things I've said in the introduction to this course is I want to encourage you to think about moral issues. Think deeply, and for some of you this may be a new experience because you may have been very conventional in your thinking. You may never have thought about the rules. You never thought about the cultural mores, whether or not they're something you should continue in or not. Well, reflective morality requires you to think about that. You're reasoning ethically. You're doing this independently. The group identification, yeah, it's nice to be part of that group, but I'm going to think about things for myself, and I'm going to begin that process of charting my own moral path. Authority, should I submit to that authority or not? I'm going to question authority. I'm going to think about things. Socrates said I should live an examined life. At this point in my life, I'm going to start examining my life. By the time you reach stage 5 of this post-conventional level, and I'm skipping some stages here, obviously, you have reached the place where you understand that there are higher ends than the law, and that the laws themselves were crafted to bring about these higher ends. Those laws are viewed then as the social contract. Here you can see the Gandhis and the kings. They said there are higher ends. There is a higher morality that is above and beyond the law. The law is nothing more than a human effort to accomplish these higher ends. Martin Luther King, for example, said, these laws are unjust. I have a moral responsibility not to obey unjust laws. Well, why is that? Well, King understood that the purpose of law is justice. And if you have a law that rather than assuring justice, that law is in fact enforcing injustice, that is an immoral, unjust law. And that is a social contract not worth living under, particularly if you happen to be a racial minority. So that's stage 5. Stage 6 is even higher, though. At this point in time, you are your own lawgiver. We've talked about the who says so problem. If God is dead, who's going to take his place? By stage 6, you are saying, me, I'm going to take his place. I am going to choose my own ethical principles. I'm going to arrive at these principles logically. And they're going to be comprehensive. They're going to cover the full spectrum of life and the situations I'm going to face. They're going to be universal. They're going to be laws that would be good for the entire world to have. And they're going to be logically consistent. So I am becoming my own lawgiver. I am now, as the poem Invictus says, the captain of my fate and the master of my soul, and I myself will choose what is right for me, and I will decide what is wrong for me. So there you have it. Why does Kohlberg matter? Well, the authors of our text, Jacques Thoreau, and you see kind of a fuzzy picture, and that's the only one I could find online. I love the beard. He and Keith Krausman could be called Kohlbergites, as could almost every moral philosopher for the last 40 years or so. They agree with Kohlberg, and you see that in what they wrote with respect to conventional and post-conventional morality. And their moral argument, I say here in this slide, the large parts of their moral argument are based on the theories of Kohlberg. Actually, that's a bit of an understatement. Their entire moral argument is ultimately Kohlbergian. It's based on his theories. And though there are other moral theories out there, they're all pretty similar because they come from, they're water from the same well. Modern ethical theory has pretty much drawn its water from the well that was this brilliant mind, Lawrence Kohlberg. In recent day, there have been those who have come to question Kohlberg's theories. One of those is Jonathan Haidt. We introduced you to Haidt in the last chapter. And in his book, his best-selling book, The Righteous Mind, he offers an interesting critique of Kohlberg, one that I just happen to agree with. He pointed out that in spite of the fact that Kohlberg has inspired a generation of ethicists, there are some problems with his model. Most significantly, his research was gained solely through research among the weird. Now, this is an acronym. Kohlberg did serious scientific work, and sociological research was gathered from among people that were Western, educated, lived in industrialized societies, rich societies, and democratic societies. The problem is that is a very small slice of the human race. Most of the world is non-Western. There is a non-Western world. The majority of the people in the world live in that non-Western world. Kohlberg's research and his theories were based on work that was done only in the West. Hate writes. Mark Twain once said that to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Once Kohlberg developed his moral dilemmas and his scoring techniques, the psychological community had a new hammer, and 1,000 graduate students used it to pound out dissertations on moral reasoning. But there's a deeper reasoning. So many young psychologists began to study morality from a rationalistic perspective, and this was Kohlberg's second great innovation. He used his research to build a scientific justification for a secular liberal moral order. Okay, that's what we're talking about here, a subjective theory. Let's see what that's all about. Kohlberg thought that parents and other authorities were obstacles to moral development. That's quite a statement, isn't it? If you want your kids to learn about the physical world, let them play with cups of water. Don't lecture them about the conservation of volume. And if you want your kids to learn about the social world, let them play with other kids and resolve disputes. Don't lecture them about the Ten Commandments. And for heaven's sakes, don't force them to obey God or their teachers or you. That will only freeze them at the conventional level. I want to emphasize again that Haidt is not a religious man. He doesn't think very much of religion. Well, he does. He sees it in his evolutionary model as something that has had a competitive, given the human race a competitive advantage at a point in time. But he points out some things that those who know Kohlberg well know to be true. The idea is that by the time you're at the point most of you are today, where you're entering the academic world, you are leaving home and you're coming to college, you're taking college level courses, you are stunted in your moral development, at least your moral reasoning. And the people to blame for this are your parents and the other authority figures in the culture, perhaps your village priest, various teachers you've had along the way. And so what's the answer? Well, you first of all have to realize what went wrong. And kids were stuck at the conventional level because they were lectured about things like the Ten Commandments. They were told that they needed to obey God, traditional morality, their teachers, or you, if you're a parent. None of this was good. It froze people at the conventional level. Haidt continues. Kohlberg's timing was perfect. Just as the first wave of baby boomers was entering graduate school, he transformed moral psychology into a boomer-friendly mood to justice. And he gave them a tool to measure children's progress towards the liberal idea. For the next 25 years, from the 1970s through the 1990s, moral psychologists mostly just interviewed young people about moral dilemmas and analyzed their justifications. Let's talk a little bit about this timing thing. When were the baby boomers, that's my generation, when were we entering graduate school? Well, that was right after the countercultural revolution of the 1960s. And that revolution had some values. They weren't put together in a coherent philosophy, but it was an anti-authority, anti-establishment, anti-traditional rules and morals. That was the mood, more than a coherent philosophy. I remember living through that time myself. One of the things we used to say is never trust anyone over 30. Another big saying was question authority. So all of the elements that would become a coherent moral philosophy under Kohlberg were floating around in a disjointed manner during the counterculture of the 1960s. And while my generation was out in the streets causing havoc, protesting the war, burning down buildings, making love, not war, all that sort of thing, Lawrence Kohlberg was putting all these ideas together into a coherent moral philosophy. And so the war in Vietnam ended, and the counterculture revolution seemed to come to an end. Actually, the values went forward, but at least the outward signs of the revolution seemed to go away. Everyone quit marching around, having sit-ins. They went to class. They had to learn something. And when they arrived there, they found a moral theory that had been prepared almost as if it was prepared for them. All of the values of their moral theory, including the question authority, don't trust your parents, all that was there in this new moral philosophy. And as Haidt points out, the timing was perfect. And Kohlberg's thoughts were profound and powerful, and they transformed the whole study of moral psychology, ethics, what we're talking about. It all changed. The countercultural revolution was all about social justice. When Haidt writes about a mood to justice, he's talking here about social justice. That's what my generation was big into. And that's what this new moral theory was into. And now we have a tool. Those who studied moral psychology had a way of measuring how children and youth were moving towards the liberal idea. That's the normative prescriptive theory. Our generation had that. It wasn't fully formed, but we didn't like the way things were. We didn't like the norm. We thought there ought to be a new norm. We had a vague notion of what it should be. You can kind of find that if you listen to John Lennon's song Imagine. That's kind of what we wanted. Well, how do we get there? Well, Kohlberg provided the lamp unto our feet and the guide unto our path. And so as Haidt observes, for the next 25 years, Kohlberg's ideas dominated the field. People like the authors of our textbook came of age during this time. And wow, dissertations were written, studies were done, something new and wonderful had been created, and its ideas were compelling. Now, Haidt notes that Kohlberg was not necessarily politically motivated, and that he did careful, honest, scientific research. So, what's the problem with this theory? Well, it's in the framework. The bias of a person creeps in a lot of times, even if they're trying to be scientific, in that they set up experiments and so forth, moved or directed towards a predefined end. And Haidt writes, by using a framework that predefined morality as justice, again, social justice, using a framework that denigrated authority, remember parents and other authority figures are the problem, hierarchy, and most importantly, tradition, it was inevitable that the research would support worldviews that were secular, questioning, and egalitarian. In other words, the research presupposed the conclusions that the research would yield. It was done unconsciously. The work was honestly done. And it's also interesting that the research was done with my generation in the Western world. The rest of the world was not consulted. And so, is the theory of moral development truly cross-cultural? Also, the assumption was that people that were had in their moral thinking reached the post-conventional level would be more moral than people that were at the conventional level. No one ever studied to find out whether that's true. Well, Haidt and others have done some work and found out, guess what? It's not necessarily true. High moral reasoning does not necessarily correspond to high moral behavior. There are some problems with Kohlberg's theory.